Good morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're here, of course, on the traditional land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I would like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are here with us today. And I'm proud to be part of a government that will be giving all Australians the chance to vote in a referendum to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our Constitution. And I acknowledge the current and ex-serving members of our Australian Defence Force who are here with us today. Thank you all for your service. And I acknowledge also the families of our Australian Defence Force personnel and veterans. Thank you for your support and the sacrifices that you have made in supporting your veteran family member. I acknowledge, of course, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Minister for Defence, other Defence Ministers, the Chief of the Defence Force, and all parliamentarians who have joined us here for today's event. Thank you for coming along. 2023 marks the 50th anniversary of the end of Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was the longest 20th century conflict in which Australia participated. It involved approximately 60,000 personnel, of which 523 were tragically killed, and more than 3,000 were wounded. We know many still carry the scars of their service with them to this day. Australia's commitment in the Vietnam War started with the arrival in Vietnam in 1962 of the Australian Army training team in a training and advisory capacity. The commitment increased to include a task force in 1966 whose strength peaked at some 8,500 personnel before it was withdrawn in 1971. Over the course of the war, personnel from all three services of the Australian Defence Force deployed to South Vietnam. When combat operations ended in 1972, a number of Australian personnel remained in Vietnam. Among these was a platoon guarding the Australian Embassy in Saigon, which was withdrawn in 1973. This was a war that was at times contentious at home, and for some veterans, their service not recognised as it should have been. I hope that today is a step in the right direction to healing. The Australian Government is honouring those who served, and throughout this commemorative year will specifically recognise the service and sacrifice of Vietnam veterans and their families, regardless of their service or duration of deployment. Today, I'm very proud to invite the Prime Minister to launch a special commemorative medallion marking the 50th anniversary of the end of Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Keogh, and I also acknowledge all of the special guests who are here, but particularly want to acknowledge the veterans and serving personnel in the Australian Defence Force who have joined us here this morning. Welcome to Parliament House. We are here today to acknowledge courage. We are here today to acknowledge sacrifice. We are here to acknowledge the bonds of camaraderie forged under fire and the cruel realities of loss. Half a century after Australian guns fell silent in Vietnam, our nation has not repaid what we owe to the 60,000 Australians who served in that conflict. And we cannot. More than 3,000 were wounded, and tragically 523 were killed. Futures were robbed, lives were changed irrevocably for those who went, for those who loved them. And yet for so long we did not as a nation measure up to them. It is a debt we can never repay, but for so long it was a debt that we failed to even acknowledge. Let us stand in this place, in this Parliament, and speak loudly and clearly about those who were sent to war in our name, who did their duty in our name, and whose names we did not hold up as proudly as we should have. This year, As we mark 50 years since the role of Australian troops in the hostilities in Vietnam came to a close, let us acknowledge your service and your sacrifice. Many of you returned to face new battles at home, and not every one of those battles was won. Some of them were fought so quietly they went unnoticed. Indeed, for so many of our veterans, silence was a shield against the world, and out of stillness, while within them, the cacophony of war raged on. That has been the experience for so many, whether they raised arms against the enemy or worked desperately to save the lives of the wounded and the dying. Just as our veterans stepped up for us, we must step up for them. We owe them a debt greater than mere gratitude. And here, in the nation's parliament, is the right place to begin. So to each and every one of our Vietnam veterans, I say, we honour you, we thank you, and we are so sorry it took us so long as a nation to do so. You deserve better. Let us begin here with this formal acknowledgement in our national parliament. This medallion and certificate are a small but a meaningful way to honour your service and to recognise the sacrifice of those who tragically never returned home. It honours those who did return home but have endured those scars of service, both seen and unseen. It also serves to further acknowledge the families of Vietnam veterans for your sacrifice and support. These medallions are available for every veteran. They can be applied for by veterans, widows of veterans, and other family members of veterans of the Vietnam War. We are extremely grateful to be joined today by some of those fine Australians who donned our uniform to serve in our name in Vietnam. As Prime Minister of Australia, I thank you. Your presence here today honours the families of those that we lost. It honours all those you served with, all you experienced together, all you endured together. Your experiences during and after the war are a powerful reminder of the sacrifices made by those who have served our country and the debt of gratitude we owe each and every one of you. It is important as Australians that we know the stories of your service in Vietnam, but also what you've achieved since. In your advocacy for your mates, your local community and your continued involvement with ex-service organisations, we see some of the very best of the Australian spirit. It is that spirit, backed by lived experience, that has seen so many veterans adding to and strengthening communities and businesses with their skills as leaders, planners, thinkers and communicators, and an ethos built on service, courage, respect and integrity. To every veteran here today, it is an honour to be here with you. For those serving men and women, thank you for joining with your veterans and the Parliament here today as well, including our Chief of the Defence Force. I say today and every day, thank you for your service.
I'd now like to invite the Prime Minister to present medallions and certificates to our veterans that are here today, and to support us in doing that, I'd invite my friend Matt Thistlethwaite, the Assistant Minister for Defence and Veterans Affairs, to join us here on the stage. The medallion, accompanied by a certificate of recognition, is available to all those who served in Vietnam and to the family of veterans who have since passed away or were tragically killed in action during the Vietnam War. The medallion depicts the Commonwealth coat of arms and displays a UH-1 Iroquois Huey helicopter, HMAS Sydney, Vung Tau Ferry, and an Australian soldier. Veterans, I invite you to come forward when your name is called to receive your medallion and to have a photo with our Prime Minister. First, we have Mr. Noel McLaughlin. Noel served in the Royal Australian Armoured Corps. Noel did two tours of Vietnam, his first as a national serviceman in 1969. Noel re-enlisted in 1970, serving a second tour of duty with 3 Troop, Alpha Squadron, 3rd Cavalry Regiment in 1971. Mr. Rodney Barney Hanson. Barney served in the Royal Australian Navy between 1968 until 1991. From 1971 to 73, Barney served on HMAS Parramatta, which saw active service during the Vietnam War, escorting HMAS Sydney to Vung Tau. Mr. William Brian Armstrong. Brian served in the Royal Australian Artillery from 1966. In 1967, he was posted to the 111th Light Anti-Aircraft Battery. He then completed his engineering studies before being posted to the 12th Field Regiment, 104 Field Battery, between 1970 and 1973. Mr. Gerard Mapston. Gerard served in the Royal Australian Air Force. Gerard served in Vietnam in 9 Squadron, an RAAF helicopter squadron. Gerard did 2 tours of Vietnam, one as a gunner in 1968 and the other as a crewman in 1970. Mr. John Moore. John joined the Royal Australian Navy as a junior recruit in 1970, aged 16, and completed his first year at HMAS Lewin in Fremantle. John served on HMAS Sydney as a seaman communicator in Vietnam on 3 occasions in 1971. Mr. Elliot Mac Weller. Mac joined the Royal Australian Air Force as an aircraft apprentice in 1958, completing engineering studies at RMIT. In 1971, he saw active service as the Senior Engineering Officer at 9 Squadron, RAAF, operating from Vung Tau, South Vietnam, in support of the Australian Army Task Force. Mac went on to serve his country for 48 years on active and reserve service with the RAAF. Mr. Peter Rosemond. Peter enlisted into the regular army in 1967. Peter was posted to the 1st Armoured Regiment as a gunner signaller in 1969. He deployed to South Vietnam as a tank commander in that year. Peter served with distinction for many years, becoming the Regimental Sergeant Major of the Army. Mr. Ray Lastelle. Ray entered the Royal Australian Navy as a junior recruit in 1963. He served in the Permanent Navy for 20 years, with a further 24 years in the Naval Reserves. Ray served on HMAS Derwent from 1966, providing logistic support to HMAS Sydney. Mr. Rodney O'Regan. In 1969, Rodney volunteered for national service. Rodney was posted to South Vietnam in mid-1970 to 1 Field Squadron Royal Engineers, where he served in 2nd Troop as a field engineer, or as they were fondly known, the Tunnel Rats. Ms. Colleen Thurger. Colleen served for 5 years as an army nurse and was one of the first 4 Army nurses to be posted to 8 Field Ambulance in Vietnam from 1967 to 1968. Commonly known as the Fab Four, Colleen was the first female ACT president of the RSL. Veterans, families and friends, invited guests, and especially our veteran guests today, our members of the Defence Force and of my fellow parliamentarians. It has been a great honour to welcome you all here today to join the Prime Minister and I in launching the 50th anniversary Commemorative Medallion and Certificate here at Parliament House. On behalf of all veterans and veteran families of the Vietnam War, who today you represent from across the Navy, Army, Air Force and the nurses, thank you for your service. On the 18th of August this year, the nation will have the opportunity to commemorate the service and sacrifice of all Vietnam veterans on Vietnam Veterans Day. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the medallion presentation here today. I invite you now to join us and our veterans for some light refreshments. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this important launching of our medallions, and have an excellent morning. Thank you.